Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to see you all here today. I think you made a great choice to be here in church on this wonderful day, and I hope you're all ready to learn from the Word of God together. So you can see the topic of my sermon here, making decisions without regret. Do you find it challenging to make decisions sometimes? Do you feel a lot of pressure to not make a mistake? Do you wish you could be more confident in God's approval of your decisions? Do you want to avoid decisions that you won't regret? Decisions or choices are something that we all have to make. There's big decisions and little ones. The little decisions are important because we will never be faithful in the big things if we're not faithful in the little things. They are what form our character, our thought patterns, and prepare us to make better decisions when it is even more critical. Today, I won't be talking about those kinds of day-to-day choices. We will be focusing on bigger decisions and what the Bible teaches about how to navigate those. So, our responsibility and decision making. At the beginning of this study, we need to establish two important principles. One, God has given us free will. He made us free moral agents. And number two, with that freedom comes responsibility. We can ask the question, are we forced to serve God? Joshua 24:15. And if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of which your fathers served that were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So even the Israelites, who were the chosen nation of God to represent Him, had the freedom to reject God. We have the same freedom. God doesn't force us to serve Him. Think back to the beginning with Adam and Eve. Do you think God could have stepped in and stopped Eve from eating that forbidden fruit? Yeah, I think God could. He's able to. But that would have violated her free will. So God allows us to fully make our own decisions. And He isn't as restrictive as a lot of people think. He actually gives us a lot of freedom. If you remember from the verse, it says, "From all the trees in the garden you can eat, but this one single one, don't eat it." But with great freedom comes great responsibility. Oftentimes, we don't like responsibility, right? Why is that? Why don't we like responsibility? Well, I think one reason is because we're scared of failing or being judged by others. In a way, taking responsibility is painting a target on our back. So what is our tendency to do? Our tendency is to put that responsibility on external circumstances, other people, or God, because it protects us. It protects our ego. To put that responsibility on external factors, so when we're doing this, what can that look like in the context of making decisions? It can look like hoping that God will give us a sign to show us exactly what to do. That way, we'll never make the wrong choice. We don't even need to choose. God will choose for us, in a sense. It can also look like never making a decision, being so indecisive because we don't want to make the wrong choice, so we just don't choose anything at all. Or allowing others to make the decisions for us because they know better than us. But what happens when we don't take responsibility for our choices? Well, we allow external circumstances and the people around us to dictate who we become. We lose our free will and individuality to an extent because we are the product of our choices. So no matter how much we might try to avoid responsibility, God will hold us accountable for all the decisions we did or did not make. Romans 14:12. So then each of us shall give an account of himself to God. This isn't a bad thing, because we need someone to keep us accountable as humans. God gave us the privilege and responsibility to make our own decisions, and He created us as intelligent creatures with the capacity to make good decisions. And this is one of the things that separates us from animals, as we read in the verse key text. Do not be like the horse or the mule, which have no understanding, which must be harnessed with bit and bridle, else they will not come near you. Sometimes we want to be like the horse or mule. We sometimes want God to just pull us in the right direction. But God gave us this understanding. He gave us a brain, and He doesn't want to force us to serve Him. He wants us to choose Him. The ministry of healing has this nice sentence. It says, God has given us the power of choice. It is ours to exercise. Now, this can be a bit intimidating, but God didn't just leave us a huge responsibility of making choices without any help. There are a lot of strategies and resources that we have at our disposal to aid in this process. And this will be the bulk of our discussion today. So, 6 practical tips for decision making. Number 1, be skeptical of your emotions and desires. Let's look at a story in the first book of the Bible about 2 brothers. One was Esau, one was Jacob. Esau was the firstborn, and because of that, in their time, he had a special blessing and privilege. And this was something that Jacob wanted. Esau was a hunter, and one day he was out in the fields. He had a really long, tiring day. I don't know if you've ever come home from a long day recently, especially if you were working outside in the heat. I'm sure you know what it feels like. You're so exhausted. And Jacob was just there, perfectly waiting, making this delicious stew. Now, I don't know if this was intentional or not. It seems almost as though it was. And Jacob, now seeing this opportunity, he decided to take advantage of his brother, and he offered this crooked deal: the stew for the birthright. What was Esau's response to the offer? He said, "Look, I am about to die, so what is this birthright to me?" Was Esau really about to die? No, of course not. But that's how he felt, clearly. In that moment, his feelings and desires were stronger than his reasoning. And we are susceptible to the same thing. Have you ever watched a romantic movie? The people you watch, and these people are in love, and they're making so many stupid choices, and it's almost annoying to the point. You're like, don't do that. I know what's going to happen. That's not a good result. And sometimes we even see this with people around us, our friends. And it's because we're not experiencing the same emotions and feelings as them, so it's a lot easier for us to take a step back and see it as it is. But when we experience those emotions, they can change the way that we see things. People call this being blindly in love. Do emotions affect your shopping? I know recently I was on a road trip and I had to get some food for the way home. But I made the mistake of going right before dinner, so we were really hungry. And I go and I'm putting all this stuff in my basket. My friend is looking at me and he's like, "Wow, that's a lot of food. Are you really going to eat that?" I'm like, "Of course, that's nothing." But then we started driving, and that food lasted me for 3 days. I was pretty surprised. So my craving for food skewed my judgment on how much I needed. Our emotions and desires have a effect on the way we perceive reality. So before making a decision, especially an important one, it is crucial that we make sure our logic is louder than our lust. What happens when we make emotional decisions in the moment? When the emotions wear off, we wake up to reality and realize our mistake. Genesis 27:36. And Esau said, "Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and now look, he has taken away my blessing." When Esau's reasoning abilities kicked in, he regretted his decision. He felt deceived and taken advantage of. What was Esau's decision based on? Well, as we discussed, it was based on his hunger, his physical desires. There are countless examples in the Bible of people basing their decisions on their feelings or desires. Adam's decision to eat the fruit. Samson's decision to tell Delilah his secret. David's decision to commit adultery with Bathsheba. All these decisions were made in the moment, largely based on feelings. And what does the Bible teach about our feelings? The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? We can't rely on our feelings to make decisions because they are deceitful. Sometimes they make us think we want one thing in the moment, but if we were able to take a step back and see the bigger picture, we would realize that that is definitely something we don't want. If Adam realized the full consequences of eating that fruit, do you think he would eat it? If Samson knew he would get his eyes plucked out and be a slave for the rest of his life, do you think he would have gave in to Delilah's persistence? If David could foresee the death of his son and all other evil that resulted from his decision, would he reconsider? See, we don't get the luxury of knowing the outcome of every decision that we make, but we do have a brain that enables us to evaluate likely outcomes of our choices. Am I saying that all emotions are bad and should just be disregarded and suppressed? No, of course not. It's dangerous to marry someone that we don't love. But it's also dangerous to marry someone if our only reason is because we have feelings for them. Although emotions have an important role to play, we need to be careful to not base our decisions on our feelings or desires, because we will get deceived. So, what's the opposite? Take an analytical approach. How many of you like math or logic, reason? Anybody here? A few people? Using this part of our brain to make decisions is actually endorsed by Jesus. Let's read in Luke 14:28. It says, "For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it?" And a few verses later, "Or what king, going to make war against another king, does not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000. So he is giving some examples with the message that his disciples should not count the cost before choosing to follow him. And he makes it sound like it's common sense to analyze our options before we make a decision. Here are 3 ways that I thought of that we can get analytical. One is to run some numbers. You can get very technical with this, but at least some basic numbers can help put things into perspective. For example, a cost-benefit analysis. If we think of this can be particularly useful for choosing a post-secondary pathway, for example, because you might have this option to go live here, and now you have to pay living expenses. You might have an option to go here, and the tuition is higher or lower. You might save on food here, you might save on gas here. These are all numbers, and when we put these into perspective, they can help to make our decision easier. And this applies for any expense as well. It could be a car. Maybe we're deciding if we're going to an electric vehicle or not. How much is that going to cost us long term? It's helpful to check some of these numbers. When we understand the numbers, sometimes the best option becomes obvious. I actually had a whole university course dedicated to making decisions based on economic analysis. And I'll tell you, it can get very technical, but I think even just the basics can help us. Number 2, consider the pros and cons. So I think this is something helpful when you have similar options and you're just trying to pick out what's really different about these. I might be doing this wrong because I've done it a few times. I haven't personally gotten the most benefit out of it, but I hear other people find it helpful. And at the very least, writing down your options and the differences between them can help, because it helps to get it out of our heads. And I think this can also help us to move away from emotional decisions. And the third one I'll mention is narrowing down your options. This is my go-to method, because for me, it's often easier to decide what I don't want than what I do want. So you have all your options and you're like, oh, definitely I don't want that, off the list. Now you only have 3 left. You keep cutting them down until you only have 1 option left. So it's easier to decide when we have less options. And a quick way to do this as well is to eliminate options that are sinful or that will likely lead us into sin. 1 Corinthians says, "Therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God." So there are some decisions that will lead us into sin. And if we can't do that to the glory of God, then it's better to avoid it altogether in the first place. Just cross it off the list. We don't even need to think about that option anymore. It's a good initial question to ask. Now, with this section, I need to leave one warning. Proverbs 3, verse 5 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." So what I get from this is that we need to use our understanding, but we can't lean on our own understanding. We can't fully rely on that. That brings us to the next section. Align your will with God's will. Do you ever wish that God would just directly tell you which decision to make? Which university to go to, who to marry, where to move? We pray to God hoping that He tells us exactly what we should do. We look for signs, and we hope for some kind of dream or vision maybe. And sometimes God does work in these ways. But from what I've seen, most of the time, He doesn't. Why doesn't God just tell us exactly what to do at each stage in our life? And in each choice that we have to make? Wouldn't that just make life so much easier and better, because we would never make a mistake? If God were to make all our choices for us, again, it wouldn't really be our life. It wouldn't really be free will. Think about it. If God tells us what we should do, then we don't really have a choice anymore whether to do it or not. You can always say, oh, well, we can just say God told us what to do, but we can decide not to do it. But what are you doing at that point? Disobeying God? That's not a good option either. And there are some serious consequences. So out of fear of the consequences, we are forced to choose what He had laid out for us, even if it's not what we wanted. But that's not what God wants for us at all. God loves us, and He wants a loving relationship with us, where we are free to choose whether or not to love Him back. Because love cannot exist without freedom. What's another reason it can seem like God isn't giving us an answer? Well, sometimes God does give us an answer, just not right away, and we need to be a bit patient. Sometimes it takes time for us to understand and accept God's will. If He told us everything off the bat, we wouldn't be able to handle it. Imagine you were recently baptized in the church, and now God tells you each and everything that you need to overcome in your entire life. All the bad habits you need to quit, all the relationships you need to cut off. How would that feel? I think it would be pretty overwhelming, and I don't think we would be able to handle that. God wants to help us in our decision-making process, but He won't give us more than we can bear. I still have many things to say to you, but you cannot bear them now. This is Jesus talking to His disciples. We need time to process the truth and to understand it for ourselves. So, what's the point of even going to God if we can't always expect a direct answer? I believe the main goal in seeking wisdom from God in decisions should be to align our will with His will, to understand reality from His perspective. There are two things that prevent us from doing this. One is our stubbornness, and two is our ignorance. So in order to align our will with God's will, we need humility and understanding or knowledge. Do you think Jesus made good decisions when He was here? Yes. How did He make His decisions then? Let's read in John 5, verse 30. I can of myself do nothing. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is righteous, because I do not seek my own will, but the will of the Father who sent me. So judgment is like making decisions. And you can just see so much humility here in Jesus' answer. How can we make righteous and good decisions? By not seeking our own will, but by seeking God's will. So how can we have this shift from seeking our own will to God's will? Because I think it's something that's not natural to us. Well, Romans 12, verse 2 says, "And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." If we want to discern the will of God, our minds need to be renewed. We need to surrender our hearts to God in prayer. And this is not a one-time thing. It's an everyday thing. Most of the time, when we are seeking wisdom from God for a decision, we already have some kind of idea in our heads of what we want or what we think would be the best option. And part of surrendering our hearts is surrendering our plans. I've tried this before, and it's actually not that complicated. You can go to God in prayer. Pray, tell Him about the choice that you have to make in your life. You can tell Him about your options. Of course, He knows all these things, but it's having a conversation with God. And you can say, this is the decision that I would like and that I think is good and that I desire, but I know it might not be according to your will, and I know it might not be the best decision for me. So please, take this decision and help me to make a better one, even if this is the wrong one. Help me to be willing to accept whatever else you have for me. And this is exactly what Jesus did. When He prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, He had His own will. He had His own desires. And He said, "Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done." Sometimes, before a good path can even become available to us, we need to let go of certain things. I think a good way to imagine it is to think of life as a maze with narrow walls. Some parts are wider and others are more narrow. And throughout our journey through life, we tend to acquire things along our way. But those things can take up so much space sometimes that they can't fit on certain paths. So sometimes, if we want to take a good path, it requires us to let go of certain things and possibly even certain people. It's part of surrender. So now, assuming we're fully surrendered and willing to do the right thing, what's next? How do we know what God thinks of our options? How do we get a knowledge of His will? Well, we need to spend time in His Word. Then Jesus said to those Jews who believed Him, "If you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." So God doesn't keep His will a secret from us, but we won't be able to see it if we are blinded by our own will. That's why we need to surrender first. Then we can come to His Word, which teaches us all about God and who He is. And as we start to understand Him, we can have a better idea of which decision He might choose if it was up to Him. And I think we experience this all the time with our friends, our family members. The more time you spend with them, the better you get to know them, and you can already predict, oh, I know what flavor of ice cream they're going to choose. I know what they're going to order. I know how they're going to do this or that, because we know people so well. And it can be the same experience with God. These principles are important for us to study. And then in Psalms it says, through your precepts I get an understanding. Through your precepts I get understanding. Therefore I hate every false way. So what are precepts? Precepts are like rules, laws, principles. How many of you have gone bowling before? I guess people aren't willing to raise their hands, but I know probably most of you have been at least once in your life. And I like to think of these principles sometimes as those guardrails that you put up when you're bowling. They show us the limits and the extents of God's will. For example, the commandment, do not commit adultery. This is a clear line of where not to cross. And there are so many ways within those lines that we can interact with people that are good and that align with God's law and with His principles. But we cannot cross that boundary. So these laws, they may not they may not show us exactly which steps to take, but they can show us at least where not to cross. So 2 keys, just to summarize, to align our will with God's will are to humbly surrendering our will to Him in prayer and understanding God's principles in His Word. Now, the next section, seeking wisdom from others. How would you define wisdom? If someone asks you, what is wisdom? The best definition I've heard before is that someone who's smart knows how to get out of a bad situation, but someone who's wise knows how to avoid a bad situation. Well, how can we be wise then? We need experience. How many of you like to play video games? You don't have to raise your hands, but I know, just think in your head. I used to play video games quite a bit. One of the ones I played a lot was Mario games. There was this one new one that came out, and it was called Impossible Mario, because the whole game was rigged. You play it, instead of the normal things happening in the level, there's all these traps set everywhere that are completely impossible to predict. Just a random fireball comes from nowhere and hits you. The floor underneath you just comes out. No indication of anything. And the only way to get good at this game was to play it, and then you realize what happened. Okay, the fireball got me. Now I need to remember for next time, when I'm at this point in the level, I need to jump to avoid it. And you remember it, and then you make it to the next trap, and then that gets you. And you go back to the beginning, and then you make it, and you continue on this path. There's a lot of games that are like this. Maybe if you played Geometry Dash before. But in life, we don't have unlimited hearts. We can't just keep dying and restarting, dying and restarting. So then how can we avoid bad situations without going through them ourselves? Well, we can learn from the experience of others. One of the best resources to learn from the mistakes of others is the Bible. But sometimes we need extra guidance on how to apply these principles to our specific current context. So who should we go to? Our best friends? An influencer on social media? ChatGPT? Proverbs 11:14 says, "Where there is no counsel, the people fall. But in the multitude of counselors, there is safety." This brings out the point that we should have multiple counselors. It's dangerous to just rely on one single person's advice, because the chances are that more people will help us to see things from a different angle that we otherwise would have missed. But is that enough? Is it enough to just surround ourselves with a large number of counselors? Well, let me remind you of a story in the Old Testament of a young man who had to make a very important decision. He had more than enough counselors around him, but he still made 2 major mistakes in his decision-making process. Can anyone guess who I'm talking about? Yeah, Brother Walter's got it, yeah. It's King Rehoboam. So his father, King Solomon, who ironically was the wisest man to ever live, had just died, and his son took over the entire kingdom of Israel. This was still when it was one big empire. But the nation was not happy with the way things were run, and they went to the king, the new king, asking him to lighten their burdens. So what does he do? Then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who stood before his father Solomon while he was still alive, saying, "How do you advise me to answer these people?" And I think this was a great first step. What do you think? He went and he consulted these elders. But watch what happens next in verse 8. But he rejected the advice which the elders had given him, and he consulted the young men who had grown up with him, who stood beside him. So 2 mistakes here that we can see. One is that he completely rejected the advice of the elders. Now, I'm not saying you need to do everything that somebody tells you, especially if they're an elder. But I think it's important to at least consider the advice they might give. And the second mistake was hand-selecting people that would tell him exactly what he wanted to hear. And that's also what we do when we come to the Bible before surrendering our own will. We ignore the verses in the Bible about being unequally yoked with unbelievers, and we read the verses about Hosea marrying a prostitute. Choosing counselors is kind of like investing. What's one of the keys to investing? I want to hear an answer on this one. One of the most important things with investing. Okay? I'm waiting till I hear it. Close. Okay, what I've heard and what I would say is the word diversification. When you are investing, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket because there's a big risk involved. If something happens to that basket, you lost all your investments. So you want to be spread out a little bit all over the place so that you're safe. And of course, when we're getting counsel from people, we want to give more weight to what some people have to say and less to others. But if we are at least willing to consider the opinions of a diverse group of people, we are more likely to make a decision that we won't regret. How many of you are not in the middle of making a big decision right now? Anyone? Okay, a few of us. So did you know that you can prepare to make a good decision in advance? Proverbs 13 verse 20 says, "He who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will be destroyed." So whether we like it or not, our friends will have an influence over us. I once heard a quote that said that we become the intersection of the people that we surround ourselves with. And I just wanted to read some commentary about a decision that Lot had to make in the Bible, the decision of where to live. It says, "Lot went in rich, and he came forth with nothing as the result of his choice. It makes every difference whether people place themselves in positions where they will have the very best help of correct influences, or whether they choose temporal advantages." So I think it's pretty clear. But I would also say it's not just about choosing the right people, it's also about being honest with them. When you go to ask someone for advice, ask yourself the question, am I sincerely seeking the other people's opinions, or am I just trying to get a confirmation that what I want is okay? When we ask other people for their opinions, we want to try to not manipulate the situation in order to make it seem like one option is clearly the best. And I'm sure you've either seen this or participated in this before, where you want something, and you could say, "Oh, we could go to the beach. It's such a beautiful sunny day, and everything's so great." Or we could stay at home and work in the garden where it's hot and tiring, and you can see the difference. You're clearly trying to lean towards one option. We need unbiased opinions. Now, another question. Do you ever wish that you could just clone yourself? Have you heard of this idea before? I remember hearing once in the news they were trying to clone sheep. I don't know if they achieved it or not. And the idea is that we clone ourselves and then we can play out different scenarios and see how it goes. It's also a similar concept to the multiverse if you're into the Avengers. Well, unfortunately, we can't do that. But did you know that there is someone in this world who's probably a lot like you in many ways, whether you acknowledge it or not? Someone who has already made a lot of decisions that you will have to make in life. Who is that? Our parents. I know that not everyone is blessed to have loving and godly parents, but for those who are, I think they are some of the best counselors that we can go to. They probably know us better than anyone else. They care about us more than anyone else, and they have experience from making similar decisions. Proverbs 4 verse 1 says, "Hear, my children, the instruction of a father," I would say, and mother, "and give attention to no understanding." So, now the next, number 5. Ask self-reflective questions. Do you ever meditate? I'm not talking about the kind where you try to empty your brain of every possible thing and every thought. I'm talking about deep, self-reflective thought. This can help us to gain clarity on which decision might be good for us. Whether you like to think about it or not, or even writing it down can also help us too. So asking self-reflective questions can be challenging because it only works if we are being fully honest with ourselves. And I have 5 questions that I think are important to ask ourselves. Number 1, are my emotions and desires leading my train of thought? Number 2, am I willing to do anything that God might lead me to do? Number 3, are my top options likely to bring me closer to God or further away? This is one I would want to just discuss a little bit more because it's hard to say if a choice will automatically make us closer to God. Even a choice like going to missionary school won't necessarily make you closer to God. But there are choices that can set us up better for success or set us up better for failure. Hebrews 12 verse 1 says, "Therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." So we can ask, will the decision that we take make our race harder to run? Will it be adding more weight to our lives? Or will it be lightening our load? Will it be eating up the precious time that God has given to us? And will it prevent us from traveling on other good paths? And now the 4th question is, how might my decision affect others? How many of you have heard the phrase, "do what's best for you"? I don't know how popular it is in your circles. I've heard it quite a few times. And I think there is some truth to it to a certain extent, but I think it can be dangerous if taken the wrong way. Philippians 2, verse 3 to 4 says, "Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others." Now, I think it's important to note this is in the context of a church community. But there are 2 extreme directions that we can go with this. One is that we can disregard others in our decision entirely and do whatever we think is best for ourselves, no matter how it affects them. Or we can just look out for others and always try to please them, no matter how much it costs us. And I personally believe the truth is found somewhere in the middle. Do we need to look out for our own interests? Yes, especially in a world with so much deception and sin, because otherwise people will just completely take advantage of us. But notice what the verse says. We don't just look out for our own needs, we should also consider that of others, especially if our decision affects others. And this is the spirit of Christ, putting other people's needs before our own. And the fifth question is, can this decision wait, or does it need to be made right away? Matthew 6:34 says, "Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about its own things. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble." So sometimes we want to make decisions that are way into the future, and I'm guilty of this sometimes. I like to think through possible scenarios in my life. And maybe sometimes thinking about it can be okay. It can be helpful in some ways. But we need to be careful to not make up our mind about certain things way in advance. Because if we pre-decided, then it might not be the most optimal option. Because as we come closer to the decision time, our personal values start to change a little bit. And maybe even our options will change, and that means our decision is likely to change. So again, if we pre-decide, it will result in likely the not best outcome. And it also leaves no room for God to redirect us. And number 6, take a step of faith. Do you struggle with indecision? It could be in small choices or in bigger ones. I would say this is definitely one of my struggles. If you know me and if you ever went to a restaurant with me, I have trouble choosing what I want to eat because everything looks good and interesting. I want to try everything. So that's why I like when I'm with other people and we all order a different thing and then we all get to try everything, and that's the best outcome for me. But we don't always get that luxury because our life is short and it's limited. We don't get to take from everybody's plate. There were other people in the Bible who were also indecisive. 1 Kings 18 verse 21 says, "And Elijah came to all the people and said, 'How long will you falter between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, follow him.' But the people answered him not a word." So this story was at the climax of Elijah's life, right before he called down fire from heaven to prove who the true God was. And God's nation struggled to choose who they would serve. What causes indecision? One thing I think can cause paralyzing indecision is the belief that there is only one right decision. In some cases, this can be true, but in most cases, I think it's not. Now, I want to ask you a question. People here who are married, do you think you could have married someone else and still have had a successful marriage? Do you think it's possible? Yes. Maybe you feel like you and your spouse are the perfect match for each other. And maybe you are the perfect match for each other. But even if that's true, could you still potentially have a happy marriage and successful marriage with someone else? I don't want you guys to answer out loud maybe in case to not cause some conflicts here. But just think in your minds. I'm sure it's... and what about another question? People who are choosing what they want to study in school. Are you happy with everything that you do in school? Do you love every single thing about it? Are there other programs or similar programs at other schools that you could also have done that could have brought you similar results and that you could have been happy with? I think this is a belief that sometimes we even hold unconsciously, and it comes out in the way we talk. Have you ever asked God to help you make the right decision? It sounds pretty innocent, right? But that way of thinking implies that all other options are wrong, and there is only one right one. And this can cause some serious indecision, because we didn't get any kind of confirmation of which option is the one. Everything might even point to one option, but what if it's not the one? What if it's a big mistake? What do? I had to make a decision recently. I joined a technical team at my university where we need to build a bridge and compete against other universities. And we're working on it the whole year, the whole school year, and at the end we have a competition. And this competition was in Manitoba. And it was about 5 days long. It was from Tuesday to Sunday it would take, because we had to drive there and back. And thankfully, the actual competition aspect finished on Friday before sunset. But for me, Saturday, as for many of you, is a day of rest and worship. And part of that is going to church and avoiding things like unnecessary work and travel. And if I were to go to the competition, I would need to be traveling back on the Sabbath. So I had two options, stay or go. I tried following most of these tips that we talked about, but eventually it came to the point when I just needed to choose. There was no more waiting. You need to decide. And I'll tell you, God didn't write the answer in the sky for me. He didn't tell me exactly what I should do. So I made a decision. I decided to go. And let me tell you, it was a very good decision. I won't say the right decision. It was a very good decision. Me and my two friends in the car spent pretty much the entire drive home having deep spiritual conversations and praising God together. It was a more blessed experience than any other regular Sabbath that I have. So, what am I saying here? Either decision could have been a good one, but also either decision could have been a bad one. I could have gone home, I could have stayed at home, gone to church, had my mind completely elsewhere, been sitting here in the pews and thinking about work or school or whatever it is. But what I realized was that what mattered more than if I stayed or if I went was how I acted where I was. I could have gone there and violated the Sabbath, but I also could have stayed here and violated the Sabbath. Indecision is still a choice. It's the choice to stand still, to not move forward in life. Someone once said, "You can't steer a car that's not moving." It can hold us back from amazing opportunities in life. And sometimes it's rooted in trying to avoid taking responsibility for our actions. We don't want to make a mistake, so we just don't decide. And I will read one quote from the book Gospel Workers. It says, "It is even more excusable to make a wrong decision sometimes than to be continually in a wavering position." Can you believe that? To be hesitating, sometimes inclined in one direction and then another, more perplexity and wretchedness result from thus hesitating and doubting than from sometimes moving too hastily. God doesn't expect us to make the absolute best possible decision every time. We should aim for a good decision. And I would argue that what matters even more than the specific decision we make is how we live in light of that decision. Success in marriage depends more on how we live with the person than which person we married. And same with my steel bridge competition, it mattered more, the outcome mattered more on how I acted than whether or not I went. If we have multiple decisions that align with God's will, we should just pick one and commit to it. That's when we need to shift our focus from choosing the right option to making the most out of our choice. Now, on that thought, coming to the end, post-decision making. Find contentment where you are. So, we made our decision now, but now what? When we have so many options, like in our society today, it can be easier for us to be dissatisfied with a choice. Think about it now. Before, people, when they're choosing their career, you don't have many options. You probably do whatever your parents did or something along those lines. But now we can do almost anything. And this is something that I also struggle with, finding contentment with my decisions. We know people who they divorce, then they remarry, and then they divorce again. People who switch careers and educational paths so many times, it can never find the one. But the common factor in all of these disappointing outcomes is them and their attitude towards the decisions they have made. The grass always looks greener on the other side. But I think it's worth trying to find contentment where we are, to water our grass a little. Otherwise, we will just keep on chasing fulfillment, but never find it. Philippians 4, verse 11, this is Paul. He says, "Not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content." Amen. So, what if the decision we make results in some challenges? Did we make a bad decision if we are facing some problems as a result of our choice? Should we regret it right away? Romans 5, verse 3-4 says, "And not only that, but we also glory in tribulation, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope." Sometimes our choices will lead to challenges, even if they're good choices. But if we know that our decision aligns with God's will, then we need to persevere. The best decisions aren't usually the easiest path to take. And oftentimes a more difficult path can give us more opportunities for growth. And leaving room for God to redirect. Proverbs 16, verse 9 says, a man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. So even once we have made a plan, even once we've made this decision, we still need to allow room for God to direct and to redirect our steps. Notice how it doesn't say God will tell you exactly which decision to make, but rather, He will direct us. And I like to think of it like a compass. How many of you have used a compass before? They're not very popular today anymore because we have GPS. It's a lot easier. But it shows us the direction that we need to go and gives us an idea of where we are. And God does the same thing for us. And together we can figure out how to get to that destination that the compass is pointing. So God directs, but we decide. Now, what if we mess up? What if we make a poor decision, and it's clearly a poor decision? Romans 8, verse 28. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to His purpose. So even if we make a mistake, God can still use it for our good and His glory. He can redirect us, like a GPS that reroutes when we take a wrong turn. We just need to maintain our connection with Him. Now, our conclusion. Some key takeaways from the message today. God gave us the personal responsibility of making decisions. He gave us a lot of practical tools to help aid us in this process, be it our emotions and desires, analytical thinking, prayer, His Word, other people, reflective thinking. There is usually more than one good option. What matters more than what we choose is how we live in light of that choice. And finally, even if we mess up, God can always redirect us if we are willing. So now I've come to the end of the message today. I hope you all were blessed and could learn something practical that will help you in your decision-making process. Amen.